worst case spill, planning for how much equipment you might need to address that reasonable worst case spill. What kind of equipment you might need. Is it similar equipment that you might have in marine versus now the inland environment? The other thing that I know I touched on a little bit this morning, but I want to reiterate more strongly, is that, again, OSPR is a small part of this planning and emergency response framework that we have within California. There was a lot of discussion this morning about local city fire departments and county fire departments, LEPC regions, and what about fire equipment and what about those types of things. And again, one of the things I brought up this morning is that we realize that this program and the money that's associated with this program, aside from very small local government coordination that we do via Cindy Murphy in the grant program, is not going to address that ongoing need for local firefighting. That is something that the administration is taking a look at. It's something that I know a lot of legislators are very, very concerned about. How are we going to ensure that our local government counterparts are funded and well-trained to deal with the fires associated with any of a number of things, this just being one of them, or the hazmat associated with any of a number of other things. That's not our authority. It's not our lane. It's not our requirements, right? So the discussions that we heard this morning about, local governments being the ones to roll out, that is absolutely true. But we are talking about plan holders. And in the way that we go about planning at OSPR, we require plan holders, these are industry folks who either own the oil, move the oil, et cetera, to have contingency plans for how they are going to address a reasonable worst case spill. The equipment they need to have for that, the drills and exercises they need to do to roll that out. That's a completely different discussion than firefighting capability. Does that make sense? I'm not saying it's not that one is necessarily more important or less important. It's just that's not the jurisdiction of our lane. It is absolutely our lane to coordinate with the Office of Emergency Services and State Fire Marshal and Dogger and all those local agencies to make sure that, and our federal counterparts, to make sure that our requirements and the way that we are going about our requirements integrate well. But I don't want us to get into long-going discussions about, if somebody wants to make a comment that, yeah, dittos, we agree that that needs to be done, that's excellent. We'll take, but that's not going to change anything about how we regulate contingency plan holders. Does that all make sense? Okay. So we don't need to go over maps again. I don't need to go over context again. So I think at this point, I would like to ask, I know, Steve, you had a number of issues you had wanted to talk about. I'm assuming that there are other folks again. Do we want to roll back and start with contingency plans again and start going through that list of items that you have? Is that a reasonable approach?
Sure.
Okay. Nice job. Well, because I know that having gone to and having gone to many, facilitated some, sometimes some folks have specific things that they want to make sure get on the record. Other folks want to be here to hear what everybody else has to say about those things on the record. And some people are here because they are agency folks and they need to be here, but they're not necessarily going to comment anything on the record. So I just want to make sure that industry has the opportunity that they need, as well as OSROs and the people who support those industries in meeting requirements, that we utilize this time as best as possible to make sure that you are able to get all your comments in. So we will start back with contingency plans. Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment.
Absolutely.
I don't know that I'm speaking for everybody, but
Okay.
part of this is all brand new to all of us, I think.
Right.
And not so much that we have comments that we want to get on the record.
Sure.
But we'd sure like to understand a little better your thought processes and why you're doing what you're doing, and,
Okay.
and trying to make sense of it all
Okay.
before we get to a point of trying to give you any meaningful input.
Okay.
So, as an example,
Okay.
I'm very curious about your equivalent to your geographic response areas or
Right.
plans or whatever
Right.
you're calling them, and understand a little bit better, how you came up with those. You mentioned watersheds, but what the relevance of that is, I don't really have a good feel.
Okay. So, do you want me to cover that, Chris? Do you want to cover that? How would you like to do this?
It does not matter to me
Okay.
how we do this. I can tell you what's inside my head. I can tell you what our team kind of looked at. I mean, I can tell you that the maps that we looked at earlier, why we looked at those and why we just used this as an example, if that helps. I mean, because waters of the state and watershed maps kind of go hand in hand. And on top of that, those areas are broke down into nice manageable pieces for contingency plan holders that might transit through those, similar to the ACP, where the ACPs are broken up with high volume ports and low volume ports and those kind of thoughts. And there was no right answer to this, and maybe I didn't say that earlier, but there was, when we go to break up the state and never how it's broken up for plan holders, as long as OSPRs can pre-position equipment or respond to the daily recovery rates for those plan holders in a timely fashion, pre-position equipment and all that, anything will work. And this is just a concept. It was all about water. It was all about where oil goes when it hits the water. We're going to talk a little bit about production facilities and pipelines and how they run through the state. Pipelines and rail are interesting because they're pretty much all up and down the state. So we need to break the state up into some sections that we can actually focus in on and what we're going to call those. Like I said, we can create new ones.
Well, you used a term there that I'm kind of curious about, in each of the marine areas.
Right.
You have, like high volume ports, and then you have facility transfer areas, and then you have the balance of the coast. Are you going to try and come up with equivalent kind of things within each of these GRAs, or will one GRA be like a high volume port, and the next one to it will be like a...
I think we use the GRA term, the Geographic Response Plan, as these individual small little areas where there's some risk to habitat, right? We've already created some. Truckee River, Randy pointed those out earlier. I was thinking more of larger areas like ACP areas, and within those have some GRPs or have some GRAs, and that's only a concept. But I thought that it works well like in ACP Area 2, where you have the ACP area, and then the OSROs only apply for those areas where there's either a plan holder that they need to cover, or they want the whole, whatever we call this whole region here, this whole area.
Called it a hunk earlier.
Hunk! And that's a technical term, hunk. It's defined.
So
Ashby
Steve,
hunk.
so Steve, I also think that one of the things that Chris and his folks and all of us are trying to get our arms around is that if you look at the marine zone, like we talked about, and planning, area planning, as well as response planning, as well as all of that stuff, is broken up by captain of the port zones, right? And it ends with marine waters. So you have very discrete zones for any of a number of things, for where OSPRs are going to apply for their rating based on areas of where you go out and do the SSSEP program, which is testing environmental sensitive sites, actually generating area plans based on captive of the port zones. And it also breaks up, as you know, pretty easily along county lines. So when we started thinking, and then you have high volume ports based on volume, right? And then you have facility transfer areas based on a smaller amount of volume, and then you have other areas along the coast. It's all fairly easy, right? Because you have marine, and then you have inland of marine, and then you have west of marine, right? And west of marine is still marine. if you take a look at that conceptually, trying to move that concept into the inland, it's not so simple. Because your planning zones are different, right? Your LEPCs are based on mutual aid and any of a number of other things. And when we look at what Chris was talking about, when we look at watershed zones, you know, if you have a spill in one of those quote-unquote higher risk areas where a rail is going through or where there's a facility, the oil isn't going to go by LEPC zones, right? It's going to go by the watershed. It's going to go by where the water is going to be moving that oil. And so, unlike on the marine zone where we were all figuring this out together 25 years ago, on the inland zone, OES and local county fires and all the other state and federal regulatory agencies were moving forward on all these other different ways to do it. So if we move in, then you look at the planning zones based on watershed and risk, and then you look at the response zones that already have plans. And so we're just trying to get a sense of what zones make sense for purposes of planning OSRO equipment, right? Applying for those kinds of ratings. And if you tell somebody that they need to have equipment within an area within 3 hours, well, is that the entire area along the state? Well, that's probably not reasonable. So how do we break that up in a way that reinforces where the oil is likely to go with the watersheds and where the planning and the emergency response systems already have planning zones set up, which is LEPCs. And so that's why you hear us kind of go back to both of those. Chris had to pick one for purposes of providing an example of what it really means and why it's not enough to just say, well, we'll just have one big map of California and OSRO's going to apply for rating anywhere along that coast within 3 hours, because you know how crazy that would be. That doesn't work at all.
So Steve, our purpose here today is to not tell you and explain to you why we picked that one, right? It's for you to tell us what makes sense. And that's what we really want to hear from you, is what makes sense. And these work groups, it'll probably come out. But I mean, if there's other ways to break up the state or that you know, that's what we want to hear about today. You know, it's not about convincing you that this is the right map. We can do that. We're pretty skilled.
I'm not so much.
We're pretty skilled at convincing.
Just trying to understand your logic, and you're asking a guy that's got experience in the marine to share what I think is important on the inland, which I haven't got a clue, because we don't know how.
And we don't either.
You're in the same boat as us.
That's right. Welcome.
Right, please. Yeah.
Could you do me a favor and overlay your proposed regions on top of this existing map?
So we
A
don't,
little more layer.
we don't have proposed regions.
The example given.
The example, right. So,
Example given. Keep the rail, keep the risk areas up there.
so watershed.
So the natural resource. There you go.
Okay, so that maybe help out Steve's question, analogous to high volume ports, low volume ports. There will be soon an operational crude by rail terminal in Bakersfield. It's under construction, it will be done, it'll be offloading 4 times the amount of crude by rail than was done in 2013 in the entire state. So you could go into Bakersfield in your zone and say, yeah, that's going to be a high volume destination. The route it takes, you'll have to find out what type of crude oil they're bringing down. And there's another project that would be twice that volume down there. So there are some key spots in the state that would maybe be analogous to what Steve said, which would be, maybe that's your first contingency plan or highest priority are those areas first, followed by smaller, lesser areas, expected with lesser demand.
So Joy, did you get that? Okay, so, I'm sorry, so in terms of maybe looking at designating high volume areas, since they're not ports, right? So high volume areas, and then see about requirements around that, but also look at starting in those high volume areas first. In terms of planning, is that what you're talking about? Okay,
Yes.
I just want to make sure that I got what you meant. Okay.
But Gordon, we don't know the route to Bakersfield yet. correct? Like it could be coming down all the way from the north or coming in from the desert.
That's correct, but I think what you're gonna find out is, as soon as they start operating and the information is being provided to various entities in the state, you'll see what those consistent routes are. And that will be likely before you've rolled out your regulations and they've gone from 60, 90-day comment period. You'll have a really good feel for where they're actually consistently coming from.
Okay.
And then that would be the sort.
Let me talk a little bit about high-volume ports, and we're kind of getting off a little subject here, but the high-volume port concept is, more risk because of more volume, right? So more risk, so we have stricter timeframes, and we have more EDRC required to those places, and that would be a perfect segue into what you're saying. There's more volume, more risk, quicker response timeframes. So what that's going to mean is OSROs are going to have to be positioning more equipment down there. Plant holders that actually transit through this Kern County area are going to have to contract with more OSRO response resources or do it themselves. And that's really all that high volume port, low volume port, other than high volume port is up and down California. It's just
Times, right?
it's quicker response times and it's more EDRC. It's more skimming, booming people, and there's plenty of OSROs. The OSROs here, you can talk to them about that. But they understand the high volume port, low volume port thing. Steve was talking about balance of the coast, less risk, longer time frames to respond. Those are the kind of things we need to look at within the work group quickly, and what makes the most sense in these, whatever we're calling those examples.
Matt?
Actually, I was thinking, when you say high volume, that not necessarily means high risk, because where they load or unload, maybe just high volume, period. I think when they start moving and they're passing through those sensitive areas, that's when it becomes high risk.
Okay, did you
So
get that,
you have
Joy?
to keep that
So
in mind.
defining what those kind of requirements mean. High volume doesn't necessarily mean high risk. We need to take a look at where risk is.
And then the other thing I was going to mention, I wish that there were more of major pipeline operators here, because you'll probably find out that some of the sensitive areas that you have identified here, some of the pipeline operators, even though they may not have submitted a plan to OSPR because it wasn't required, and under OPA 90, they have developed actually contingency plan that addresses some of the high-risk areas. I remember from the ARCO pipeline days, for example, we had significant resources identified where our pipeline at that time crossed the Colorado River, where it came close to the Pyramid Lake. And those are some very sensitive areas that you may not have the contingency plan, but it's been done under OPA 90. So hopefully when you go to the south and in Bakersfield, some of those people participate and
Okay.
identify some of that.
Excellent. Yes, please.
I'd like to understand your reasoning behind splitting an individual county up on like a proposed map, why you wouldn't follow the county line. And I'm just looking at MODOC thinking, okay, that county emergency manager now has to deal with potentially 3 different designations in his or her county.
So I think it's a very, very good point, Joy. Can you put it down? Again, how do I say this? We wanted to take a look at other agencies that have jurisdiction over some of these very same types of things, whether it's emergency response, watershed, hazardous materials management, et cetera, and see how they divided up California based on their needs. And so I think the comment that whatever regions, areas, hunks, we decide to come up with, being able to as much as possible honor county boundaries is an important distinction.
Yeah, the mental health system carves at the state differently than the Cal OES system
Right.
does, different than the trauma system does.
Absolutely.
But they all respect a county line.
Okay.
Like in YOLO, I'm in 4, but I'm on the edge of 2 and 3, so if I'm cut off from 4, like
Okay.
by the river, I have to work with 2 and 3, but it's on my county line. I'm not part of 3 different regions.
Okay, so it would be probably very helpful for you to help us get those specific ideas within the record, because I don't, and maybe Chris's folks do, one way or the other, different things are going to be segmented in different ways. And so we want it to be the best of all worlds, right? So if the county line is one of those things that's really important, then the other thing is, well, what else gives if the county line doesn't give, right? Because the watershed may not. The watershed, you may just say, okay, your county line is the same, but you may have to work on 2 different watershed plans in order to maintain that,
Which
as an
we
example.
kind of do for regional
Okay.
flood management planning and stuff
Perfect.
already, so.
Perfect.
It doesn't really matter which county it's in, we have work groups and stuff for that, but nobody in my county, it has to like double task. on
Because the
something.
county's split.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
Well, I think thinking
Yeah, I'm
ahead,
sorry.
We didn't make these. I mean, these are pre-existing.
No, right.
This-
No, right, we didn't create these. These are pre-existing zones. What you're looking at right now is the watershed zone, right. No, she knows that, right.
I was just gonna say, following on her thoughts, when you get to the point where you're gonna start having drills and exercises, and you want to involve the local governments and the response agencies, doing it on county boundaries makes a lot of sense, so they're not trying to go to drills in 5 different locations.
Exactly, and that's also why we also are trying to figure out how to best morph and maybe triple morphing with the county boundaries, morphing the LEPCs or whatever that regional mutual aid OES boundaries are with the watershed boundaries and with an acknowledgement of what works locally. Because there's all those emergency plans already internally and we don't want to have to reproduce those as well. So, yeah, that's part of what I think we're going to be looking at for the work group.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if a train were to derail
Pretty much anywhere on the line, if the rail company is understanding SEMS and everything, and we're
Right.
keeping the counties whole, and it derails in my county, they're gonna call the YOLO County Operational Area Duty Officer to pass on information, to coordinate, to liaison, all of that stuff, but if you bisect a county, now there is no single point necessarily, and people don't understand, well, am I on this side or that side today?
Excellent. Okay, that's a good point. Did you get it, Joanne?
I have a question for someone that's worked on a spill that's, say the spill happens upriver and it flows, say 100 miles, I don't know, 50, and you're going through multiple counties, and so do you just have the command posts kind of change as it's going
Well,
down?
the incident command post would be where the spill originates from. They may have strike teams or different resources that they're sending them down the line. But county-wise, the OES offices coordinate. So if it's only in one region, we all work together on a day-to-day basis. If it's between 2 regions, we have regional duty officers who bridge that region gap. That is the standardized emergency management system. We're all very familiar with it. So no matter whether it's traveling through water and going through multiple regions, or if it's a fire burning across the county lines, to do that all the time.
Okay.
We do that all the time on the marine side. For instance, the Bay Area, when we're dealing with multiple counties and the oil affects multiple counties. We deal with this, when we have oil spills on the marine side.
So I know that one of the things I heard from Steve and others as well is just trying to get an understanding of the concepts that we're talking about. So we agreed that we would start with contingency planning. We sort of talked a little bit about kind of that risk concept. We're now talking about when we're looking at maps to try and be really mindful of county boundaries, however it is that we end up dividing into hunks. Are there other things that we want to talk about having to do with reasonable worst-case spill volumes, caps, effective daily recovery rates, things that we didn't cover this morning or you feel like we need to expand more? I know I just threw out 7 questions, which is exactly what a facilitator is not supposed to do. So Yes,
I
please,
actually
Kathy.
just have a question on your risk model. Have you developed a risk model regarding, you're talking about pre-staging of OSRO equipment? Are you looking at the ability to respond to any particular area? And I'm not talking response zone in counties. I'm talking about actual, how am I going to get there? And the importance of strategically placing when we pre-stage equipment, we do it in a place because we can't normally get it there. So are you thinking about that in your risk model?
So Chris, do you want to take a crack at this, or?
Like to Bakersfield, it's easy to get to Bakersfield.
But again,
So-
remember that we are looking
Let me
at,
take a crack at it.
please.
This is about contingency plan requirements and plan holders, right? A plan holder has to plan for a significant incident and impact resources, right? So they have a spill, right? They have a spill?
So, no, you guys did a great
Got that part?
job for a risk
So-
model in this.
There's going to be some contingency plan requirements that the plan holder has to comply with. So there's response times and
Okay.
equipment response times. And then the plan holder will have to go out and shop for an OSRO or OSROs to meet those requirements, plan holder requirements, in that area. So
Wow.
it's, wow. Love that. Wow. Okay, so that's how, maybe the light now is like, so this is all about a plan holder contracting with resources to respond to their reasonable worst-case spill. That's what we're trying to talk about this morning. It's like Yvonne said numerous times, and we're trying to talk about, this is about participating with local government when an incident happens, but not for contingency plan requirements. It's not about preparing for a spill ahead of time and contracting with the resources that it needs. Networking with local government if it needs to, getting the right contracts in place, the insurance in place, so when they do have an oil spill, they've looked at all of the pieces, so when the spill does happen, they can just put all those in place. It's all about preparedness for an oil spill. And that's really what we're trying to get to today, is being prepared to respond to an oil spill. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about production facilities and pipelines if we're ready. Are we ready to talk a little bit about that? And some different concepts, Steve?
Could you talk a little bit, Randy, if you take those geographic boundaries off, the original one was just the railroads.
Right.
Now, the red areas are areas you determined are going to be high-risk areas? Is
That's-
that what
Go ahead, Randy.
The California Public Utilities Commission determined that was high hazard area.
high hazard?
Those are where the rail goes like this.
Okay. What are those squiggly lines below Lake Tahoe?
So these other ones are, so the dark red ones are the high risk or high hazard areas that California Public Utilities Commission has determined. The other squiggly lines that you see down here
Can you zoom
are
into that, Randy?
the GRPs, existing GRPs.
Geographic response plans.
Zooming in there. And so this was a joint effort through local, state, and,
EPA.
and EPA, that's correct.
Thanks, Doug.
If you just share with me.
We weren't going to forget you, honest, we weren't.
We paid for them, so.
We understand, we understand.
And then, again, and the reasons why they were developed, was my understanding, is because these are on the border, correct?
Because they cross state
They
lines.
cross state lines.
So it actually goes into Nevada.
Yeah, we go this way.
And so that is why they were developed first, because of mutual aid needs and crossing state lines.
Okay, now, from thinking about equipment and risk and stuff, I don't think I see any railroads there. And I don't imagine there's any pipelines up there, so.
So there's probably
Fuel
no
trucks,
plan
we've got
holders.
fuel trucks roll over.
Don't say the M word, the
Sorry.
T word, I mean. Say the
That's
T
why
word.
we did it.
We're going to address the T word later. But yeah, there's probably no plan holders up here.
There are.
Oh,
Peter Morgan over the PKL.
oh yeah, pipeline.
Oh, that's at the other end of the lake, that's up there at the top.
Okay, so Pyramid, Donner, there's plan holders around.
That's the north end.
So what is your question or comment? See, I mean, I know you're trying to get your arms around this.
Well, I'm trying to put some significance on what the response expectations would be in those high-risk areas. And
Right.
given there's no plan holders there, then it's kind of a moot point.
Exactly.
Rail.
Yep.
But there might be plan holders there if there are pipelines.
And if there are plan holders, they will contract with a local lodge that either has equipment in the area or one that will pre-position equipment to that area, and then somehow try to stay in business.
So it's not so much about the areas, it is the plan holders. It's what you've been saying.
It is. You know, and they charge appropriately, right? I mean, Bosco's.
But
I mean, Fort White Media is a good example. We had a requirement that there be some resources because of the